In July of 1994, the Maroon Bells Wilderness Area in Colorado was considered one of America's most photographed mountain landscapes. The Twin Peaks, reflected in the crystal-clear alpine lakes below, drew thousands of visitors each summer. But what happened to 4 tourist photographers that month would transform this scenic paradise into the center of a mystery that wouldn't be solved for 3 decades. The discovery came in 2024 when a team of climate researchers studying glacier retreat patterns stumbled upon something extraordinary. Their ground-penetrating radar, meant to measure ice thickness, detected an anomaly beneath a rocky outcrop near Crater Lake. What they found was a perfectly preserved campsite, frozen in time like a museum exhibit from the 1990s. 4 pristine sleeping bags were arranged in a circle. Cooking equipment sat unused. And most remarkably, a collection of camera equipment lay protected in waterproof cases, as if waiting patiently to tell its story. Kevin O'Sullivan had been 28 years old in 1994, an ambitious photographer from Dublin who had saved for 3 years to afford his dream trip to America. His journal, recovered from the site, revealed meticulous planning. Every sunrise angle had been calculated, every composition sketched in advance. His 3 companions, whose names would later emerge from hotel records and missing persons reports, shared his passion for capturing the perfect mountain landscape. Together, they represented 4 different countries, united by their love of photography and adventure. The morning of July 15, 1994, had started like any other at the Maroon Lake Lodge. Dorothy Campbell, who ran the establishment with her husband, remembered the group clearly, even 30 years later. They were so enthusiastic. She would tell investigators in 2024, her memory surprisingly sharp for a woman now in her 70s. Kevin showed me his notebook with all these calculations about sun angles and shadow positions. He said they were going to capture something nobody had photographed before. The lodge's registration book, preserved in the local historical society, showed their check-in 3 days earlier. 4 signatures in different hands, each with a small note about their home country. The excitement practically jumped off the yellowed pages. What the registration didn't show was the tension that had been building with another group of photographers staying at the lodge. Logan Winters had been running photography tours in the area for 5 years by 1994. At 35, he considered himself the local expert on Maroon Bells photography. His business, Alpine Light Tours, had been struggling that summer. The economic recession had cut deeply into tourism, and competition from independent guides offering cheaper rates was eating into his client base. The arrival of O'Sullivan's group, who had hired a volunteer guide instead of his premium service, represented everything that threatened his livelihood. There was definitely friction. Paul Martinez, the park ranger who would later file the missing persons report, recalled decades later. Logan approached their table at dinner the night before they left. I couldn't hear the conversation, but body language said it all. Pointing fingers, raised voices. The Irish fellow, Kevin, he stayed calm, but you could see Logan was agitated. The volunteer guide they had chosen was Adrian Fox, just 24 years old and new to the area. Fox had arrived in Aspen 6 months earlier, offering his services at the visitor center in exchange for camping privileges. His enthusiasm and knowledge of backcountry trails had impressed the tourist board, though nobody had actually verified his credentials. His wilderness first aid certificate, which he photocopied and posted on bulletin boards around town, looked official enough. Nobody thought to check the dates carefully. On the morning of July 15th, the group departed at 6 o'clock sharp. The lodge's front desk clerk noted their departure in the log, a standard safety procedure. Fox led the way, wearing a distinctive red backpack that several witnesses would remember. O'Sullivan and his 3 companions followed, their camera bags and tripods creating an awkward procession down the trail. The last confirmed sighting came from a family of hikers who passed them near the Crater Lake Junction at approximately 11:30 that morning. They were in great spirits, the father of that family would later testify, taking photos of everything. The guide was pointing out different peaks, explaining the geology. Very knowledgeable. We exchanged a few words about the weather. Not a cloud in the sky. The radio check-in log at the ranger station recorded Fox's voice at 11:30 a.m. precisely. Group at Crater Lake Junction, all well, planning to explore the upper basin for afternoon light. His voice sounded normal, even cheerful. It would be the last official communication from the group. What happened over the next few hours remained a mystery for 30 years. Fox would return to the lodge alone at 6 that evening, claiming the group had decided to camp overnight to catch the sunrise. He said they had sent him back to inform the lodge and gather additional supplies. Dorothy Campbell found this odd but not alarming. Photographers were known for their dedication to catching perfect light. Adrian seemed tired but not distressed, Campbell's husband would remember. He said they'd found an amazing spot and wanted to spend more time there. Asked if we could pack some extra food for them. We did, and he said he'd head back up in the morning. But Fox never went back up the mountain. Instead, he reported the group missing 2 days later, claiming he had returned to find their campsite abandoned. His story was consistent and believable. He had separated from them to scout an alternative route for their descent. When he returned to the agreed meeting point, they were gone. He had searched for hours before coming down to raise the alarm. The search that followed was extensive. Rangers, volunteers, and even Logan Winters joined the effort. Helicopters scanned the valleys. Dogs tracked scents that led nowhere. The mountain had seemingly swallowed 4 people whole. After 3 weeks, the search was called off. The assumption was that they had fallen into one of the area's many hidden crevasses or been swept away by a sudden rockslide. But the 2024 discovery would reveal something far different. The camping equipment was not scattered by tragedy, but carefully arranged. The sleeping bags showed no signs of panic or struggle. Everything suggested an orderly camp, as if the occupants had simply vanished. It was the cameras that would tell the real story. The film canisters, preserved by the cold and dry conditions, contained 24 exposures. When developed using special techniques for aged film, they revealed stunning images of the Maroon Bells from angles rarely seen. The photographers had indeed found something special. But the last 3 frames were what changed everything. Frame 22 showed all 4 tourists posing together at what the timestamp indicated was 2:15 p.m. They were smiling, arms around each other's shoulders with the dramatic peaks behind them. Frame 23, taken at 2:47 p.m., showed them setting up camp, with Fox visible in the background organizing equipment. But frame 24, the final image, time-stamped at 3:04 p.m., showed all 5 people together, including Fox, in a group selfie taken with the camera's timer function. This was impossible according to Fox's story. He had claimed to have separated from the group at noon to scout alternative routes. Yet here he was, over 3 hours later, still with them and apparently on excellent terms. The photograph showed no tension, no conflict, just 5 people sharing a moment of triumph in the wilderness. The revelation of the photographs in 2024 sent investigators back through 3 decades of files. The original missing persons case had been thorough but limited by 1994 technology. No GPS tracking, no cell phone records, no digital breadcrumbs to follow. But what emerged from the archived paperwork painted a troubling picture of inconsistencies that had been overlooked in the initial investigation. Detective Sarah Brennan, assigned to the cold case unit, began with Logan Winters. His animosity toward the group was well documented, and his financial troubles in 1994 provided clear motive. The photography tour business had been his life, and competition from cheaper guides like Fox was destroying it. Records showed he had filed for bankruptcy just 2 months after the disappearance. But was financial pressure enough to drive him to eliminate 4 competitors? Logan was definitely angry that morning, Paul Martinez, the now retired park ranger, told Detective Brennan. I remember because he came to the ranger station right after the group left with Fox. He was ranting about unlicensed guides ruining legitimate businesses. Said, someone was going to get hurt with these amateurs leading trips. The investigation revealed that Winters had told police he was in Denver on July 15th, meeting with potential investors for his struggling business. He had even produced a receipt from a Denver restaurant dated that day. But when Brennan's team examined credit card records that had recently been digitized, they found something interesting. A gas station charge in Glenwood Springs at 4:47 p.m. on July 15th. Glenwood Springs was on the route between Denver and Aspen, but the timing didn't work. If Winters had been in Denver for lunch, he couldn't have been in Glenwood Springs by late afternoon, unless he had left much earlier than claimed. More damaging still was a witness statement that had been buried in the original files. A local hiking guide named Tom Bradley had reported seeing Winters' distinctive yellow Jeep parked at a trailhead near Maroon Bells on the afternoon of July 15. Bradley had been certain of the date because it was his daughter's birthday and he was hurrying back for her party. The original investigators had dismissed this sighting, accepting Winters' alibi without deeper scrutiny. But as compelling as the case against Winters appeared, the investigation took an unexpected turn when attention shifted to Dorothy Campbell. The lodge owner's financial records from 1994 revealed a pattern of suspicious insurance claims that had somehow never been connected to the disappearance. Just 1 day before the group vanished, Campbell had filed a claim for extensive storm damage to the lodge's roof. The problem was that weather records showed no storms in the area for the entire month of July. "We were drowning in debt," Campbell's ex-husband finally admitted when tracked down in Florida. Dorothy was desperate. The lodge was going to be foreclosed. She had this idea about insurance money, said she knew someone who could make it look legitimate. But I swear it had nothing to do with those photographers. The insurance scheme added a new dimension to the case. Had the photographers somehow discovered Campbell's fraud? Kevin O'Sullivan's journal, found with his equipment, contained detailed observations about everything he encountered. One entry, dated July 14, mentioned strange conversation overheard at breakfast about insurance adjusters and documentation. Had he unknowingly stumbled onto something that made him a threat? Campbell's behavior after the disappearance also raised questions. She had been unusually insistent that the group had planned to stay out overnight, discouraging immediate search efforts. She had also been the one to suggest that they had likely fallen into a crevasse, steering searchers toward the most dangerous and inaccessible areas of the mountain. Was she deliberately misdirecting the investigation? Meanwhile, Adrian Fox remained helpful and cooperative throughout the renewed investigation. He had built a successful outdoor equipment business in the intervening years, becoming a respected member of the community. His story had never changed, not once in 30 years. He maintained that he had separated from the group to scout routes, returned to find them gone, and searched frantically before reporting them missing. "I've lived with guilt for 3 decades," Fox told investigators, his emotion seemingly genuine. "I was their guide. I should have stayed with them. Maybe if I had been there, whatever happened wouldn't have happened." But the photographs proved Fox was lying about the timeline. He had been with the group at 3:04 p.m., not separated at noon as claimed. When confronted with this evidence, Fox's demeanor shifted slightly. He claimed the stress of the event had confused his memory, that perhaps he had gotten the times mixed up. It was possible, he suggested, that he had separated from them later than he remembered. The investigation delved deeper into Fox's background, and what emerged was troubling. The wilderness first aid certificate he had used to establish credibility was genuine, but it had expired in 1992, 2 years before the incident. He had been operating as a guide without valid certification, a fact that could have resulted in serious legal consequences if discovered. In 1994, Colorado had just implemented strict new regulations for wilderness guides following several high-profile accidents. Unlicensed guiding could result in criminal charges. More interesting still was what investigators found when they traced Fox's life before Colorado. Adrian Fox had seemingly appeared out of nowhere in January 1994. No employment history, no previous addresses, no college records, despite claiming to have studied outdoor recreation. The Social Security number he had used for employment at the visitor center had only been issued in 1993. Before that, Adrian Fox effectively didn't exist. "We ran deeper background checks," Detective Brennan would later explain. "What we found was a pattern consistent with someone in witness protection or someone running from something. The question was which?" The answer came from an unexpected source. The FBI, reviewing the case due to the interstate nature of the investigation, flagged something in their database. In 1993, a federal witness named Andrew Fitzgerald had disappeared from protective custody in Philadelphia. Fitzgerald had been set to testify against members of a violent crime family involved in racketeering and murder. His handler reported that Fitzgerald had become increasingly paranoid, convinced that his location had been compromised. A comparison of photographs was inconclusive due to the time elapsed, but certain details matched. Same height, same build, similar facial structure, allowing for aging. More compelling was a small scar on the left hand, visible in both Fitzgerald's federal documentation and in photos of Fox from the 1990s. The FBI had assumed Fitzgerald was dead, killed by the crime family he was set to testify against. But what if he had simply run? This revelation cast the entire incident in a new light. If Fox was indeed Fitzgerald, living under an assumed identity, being recognized would have been catastrophic. The crime family he had fled was still active in 1994, still dangerous. Discovery would mean death, or at best, forcing him back into a witness protection program he had already fled. The investigation returned to Kevin O'Sullivan's journal with fresh eyes. An entry from July 13 mentioned visiting the Aspen post office to mail postcards home. He had written about spending time looking at the wanted posters and missing persons boards while waiting in line, a habit he described as fascinating glimpses into American crime stories. Had he recognized something? Someone? Another tourist from the lodge, interviewed in 2024, remembered a conversation at dinner on July 14. The Irish photographer was talking about faces and memory, how sometimes you see someone and know you've seen them before but can't place where. He kept looking at the guide, Fox, in this puzzled way. I thought maybe they'd met before, but Fox said they hadn't. The pieces were falling into place, but investigators needed more. They found it in the torn map discovered at the campsite. The tear pattern was distinctive, and when they located Fox's personal effects from 1994, stored in an evidence box that had never been properly cataloged, they found a map with an identical tear. The two pieces fit together perfectly. It was the same map, torn and shared between them. Why would Fox have given the group half of his personal map unless something had gone wrong with the original plan? The radio log provided another crucial detail. Fox's 11:30 a.m. check-in had mentioned exploring the upper basin for afternoon light, but the photographs showed the group in a completely different location in the afternoon, near a rarely visited section of the trail system. They had changed plans after the radio check-in. Why? Analysis of the final photographs revealed something investigators had initially missed. In the background of frame 23, barely visible, was a dark stain on Fox's shirt that wasn't present in earlier photos. The photo quality made it impossible to determine what it was, but its location and spread pattern suggested liquid. Frame 24, the group selfie, was taken from an angle that obscured Fox's shirt. Deliberate positioning or coincidence? The investigation also uncovered an interesting detail about Logan Winter's movements that day. While his alibi about being in Denver was clearly false, his actual whereabouts were more complex. The gas station receipt from Glenwood Springs included a secondary charge, barely legible on the faded paper. He had purchased not just gas, but also Miss supplies, totaling $47. When investigators tracked down the station's archived inventory records, they found that $47 in 1994 would have bought camping supplies, rope, a tarp, and dried food. Winters was equipped for an overnight stay in the wilderness. But where had Winters actually gone? A breakthrough came from an unexpected source. A retired teacher named Martha Coleman contacted investigators after seeing news coverage of the renewed investigation. She had kept a detailed diary her entire life and had an entry from July 15, 1994. She had been hiking with her husband near Crater Lake that afternoon and had seen that unpleasant man from the lodge with the yellow Jeep hiking alone on a trail that led away from where the photographers had been heading. She remembered because Winters had been carrying camera equipment, which struck her as odd since he was supposed to be a guide, not a photographer himself. This placed Winters in the area, but on the wrong trail to have encountered the group, unless he had been tracking them, following at a distance. His purchase of camping supplies suggested he had planned to stay out overnight. Was he planning surveillance? Sabotage? Something worse? Dorothy Campbell's role became more complex as well. Phone records from the lodge, archived on old backup tapes that required special equipment to read, showed she had made 17 calls to a number in Denver on July 15 and 16. The number belonged to a law firm that specialized in bankruptcy and insurance litigation. 17 calls in 2 days suggested panic or urgent legal maneuvering. But was it related to her insurance fraud or to the disappearance? The ex-husband, when pressed, revealed another detail. Dorothy had a brother who worked construction. Did some work off the books, if you know what I mean. The day after those photographers went missing, he showed up at the lodge with 3 of his crew. Said Dorothy had hired them to do emergency repairs. But there was nothing wrong with the lodge that I could see. They spent 2 days doing something in the basement and the old storage building out back. Dorothy said it was preventative maintenance, but she was real nervous about it. The investigation team decided to examine the lodge's basement and old storage building, even after 30 years. Using ground-penetrating radar, similar to what had found the campsite, they discovered anomalies in the concrete floor of the storage building. It had been repoured in July 1994, according to construction permits filed hastily after the fact. But when they drilled core samples, they found no bodies, no evidence of the missing tourists. Instead, they discovered something else entirely: dozens of documents wrapped in plastic, insurance papers with forged damage assessments, fake repair invoices, and photographs of staged property damage. Dorothy Campbell had been creating an elaborate insurance fraud scheme, and she had hidden the evidence when investigators came looking for the missing photographers. Her panic hadn't been about the tourists at all, but about the attention their disappearance would bring to her business. The 17 phone calls to the lawyer were about protecting herself from fraud charges she feared were imminent. "I thought they'd investigate everything," Campbell finally admitted from her nursing home in 2024. "The lodge, our finances, everything. So I had my brother hide all the paperwork. But I swear on my mother's grave, I had nothing to do with those poor people disappearing." With Campbell's motive evaporating and Winters in the wrong location, investigators returned their focus to Adrian Fox and his potential identity as Andrew Fitzgerald. The FBI provided more details about Fitzgerald's background. He had been a low-level associate of the Philadelphia crime family, involved primarily in bookkeeping and money laundering. His decision to testify had come after witnessing a murder that shook him deeply. But 3 weeks before his scheduled testimony, he had vanished from a safe house in suburban Philadelphia. The crime family he was set to testify against had put a significant bounty on his head. Even in 1994, years after his disappearance, finding Andrew Fitzgerald would have been worth considerable money to the right people. Living as Adrian Fox in a remote Colorado town might have seemed safe, but one photograph in the wrong hands, one person recognizing his face, could have been fatal. Investigators re-examined the torn map with this new context. The tear wasn't random or accidental. It had been deliberately ripped along a specific line that divided the trail system into 2 sections. One half showed the commonly traveled routes, the other showed remote, rarely visited areas. It was the kind of division someone might make if they needed to separate a group, to lead some people one way while others went another. The psychological profile of Andrew Fitzgerald painted a picture of a man living in constant fear. His FBI handler had noted increasing paranoia in the weeks before his disappearance. He had become convinced that seemingly innocent encounters were actually surveillance, that random tourists were hired killers, that every unfamiliar face was a threat. This paranoia would have only intensified during his years in hiding. Imagine living every day wondering if this would be the day they found you, the FBI behavioral analyst explained. Every new person you meet could be the one sent to kill you. That kind of stress changes brain chemistry. It can lead to misinterpretation of threats, overreaction to perceived dangers. On July 13th, Kevin O'Sullivan had spent 40 minutes in the Aspen post office. Security footage from the post office had long since been destroyed, but the postal clerk's log showed he had purchased $16 worth of international stamps. That was enough for roughly a dozen postcards to Ireland. But when investigators contacted O'Sullivan's family, they reported receiving only 3 postcards from that trip. What happened to the others? The answer came from O'Sullivan's recovered journal. He had written about his fascination with the wanted posters and missing persons boards. He had also mentioned taking several of the FBI flyers as interesting souvenirs of American crime. These flyers would have included federal witness protection notices, including one for Andrew Fitzgerald that was still in circulation in 1994. A crucial piece of evidence emerged from the photography equipment found at the campsite. One of the cameras, belonging to one of O'Sullivan's companions, contained an undeveloped roll of film in addition to the canister that had been removed. This film, when carefully developed, revealed images from earlier in the trip. One photograph, taken at the lodge on July 14, showed Fox in the background near a bulletin board. On the board, clearly visible, was a wanted poster. Fox's body language in the photo showed obvious discomfort. His face turned away from the camera, his posture suggesting he was trying to leave the frame. The timeline began to crystallize. O'Sullivan had seen the wanted posters at the post office. He had taken some as souvenirs. At some point, possibly during the hike on July 15th, he had made a connection. Maybe Fox had done something that triggered recognition, a gesture, a phrase, a mannerism that matched something in the witness description on the flyer. O'Sullivan, with his photographer's eye for faces and details, would have been particularly adept at making such connections. But would recognition alone lead to 4 deaths? Investigators thought not. More likely, O'Sullivan had confronted Fox, perhaps thinking he was doing his civic duty by identifying a wanted person. He couldn't have known the deadly implications of his discovery. In his mind, he was probably just solving an interesting puzzle, maybe even helping law enforcement. Fox, living as Andrew Fitzgerald, would have seen this very differently. Recognition meant death, either from the crime family or from being forced back into a witness protection program he didn't trust. His carefully constructed new life would collapse. The paranoia he had lived with for 18 months would have exploded into full panic. The dark stain on Fox's shirt in photograph 23 suddenly made more sense. It wasn't blood, as investigators had initially wondered. Enhanced analysis suggested it was consistent with spilled coffee or another dark liquid. The kind of stain that might occur during a confrontation, when someone grabbed at your shirt or knocked something from your hands. A minor physical altercation that left no injuries but marked clothing. Investigators theorized the sequence of events. The group had stopped for lunch near Crater Lake. O'Sullivan, perhaps emboldened by having his 3 companions with him, had confronted Fox about his identity. He might have even shown him the wanted poster he had kept as a souvenir. Fox would have initially denied it, but O'Sullivan was persistent, pointing out similarities, asking questions. The situation escalated, not to violence initially, but to panic on Fox's part. He couldn't let them return to the lodge with this knowledge. They would tell others, contact authorities. Within hours, his location would be known. The crime family had connections everywhere, even in federal law enforcement. He would be dead within days. So Fox had made a desperate decision. He convinced the group to come with him to a more remote location, possibly by admitting partial truth, saying he needed to explain that there was more to the story. The torn map suggested he led them away from the main trails, into an area where they wouldn't be discovered. The group, perhaps feeling they were part of something important, a real mystery, had followed. What happened next remained unclear, But investigators believed it was not premeditated murder. More likely, it was a situation that spiraled out of control. Fox might have tried to convince them to stay silent, to understand his situation. When they refused or seemed uncertain, his paranoia would have taken over. In his mind, their hesitation was a death sentence. The campsite's organized appearance suggested something other than violent struggle. Perhaps Fox had used his knowledge of wilderness survival against them. There were plants in the area that, when ingested, could cause unconsciousness or worse. As their guide, he could have prepared food or drinks. The investigators found traces of unusual plant residue in one of the recovered containers, though after 30 years, definitive identification was impossible. But there was one piece of evidence that seemed to confirm the theory. Among the items found was a small notebook that had belonged to one of O'Sullivan's companions. Water damage had destroyed most of it, but one page near the back had survived, protected by a plastic sleeve. On it was written, in increasingly shaky handwriting, "He says we don't understand, says they'll kill him. We promised to stay quiet, but he doesn't believe. Something in the tea, feeling strange. Tell my family I love." The entry was unfinished. With this evidence, authorities issued an arrest warrant for Adrian Fox, now a successful businessman in his late 50s. The arrest took place at his home on a quiet Tuesday morning. Neighbors watched in shock as the man they had known for decades was led away in handcuffs. He had built a life, a family, a reputation. He had children who knew nothing of Andrew Fitzgerald or the 4 photographers who had disappeared in 1994. Initially, Fox maintained his innocence, sticking to his original story despite the photographic evidence proving he had lied about the timeline. His lawyer argued that inconsistencies in a 30-year-old memory were hardly proof of murder. But when prosecutors revealed they had matched his DNA to traces found on the recovered equipment and presented the partial confession note from the water-damaged notebook, Fox's composure finally cracked. "You don't understand what it was like," he said during his allocution, his voice breaking. "Every day, waiting for them to find me. Every tourist could be a killer. Every new face could be the last one I'd see. When that Irish kid started asking questions, showing me that poster, I saw my death in his eyes. Not because he meant harm, but because he didn't understand what his discovery meant." Fox explained how he had tried to reason with them, to explain his situation without revealing too much. But O'Sullivan had been adamant about doing the right thing, about contacting authorities. He kept saying it was the proper thing to do, that running from justice was wrong. He didn't understand that the justice system was what I was running from, that it couldn't protect me. The tragedy, Fox revealed, was that he had used concentrated doses of natural sedatives found in local plants, intending only to incapacitate them long enough to disappear himself. He had planned to leave them unconscious but alive, giving himself time to flee Colorado and establish another identity elsewhere. But he had miscalculated the dosage, possibly due to the altitude's effect on the plant's potency or the victim's varying sensitivities. "When I realized what had happened, I couldn't believe it," Fox said, tears streaming down his face. "I tried CPR, tried everything I knew, but they were gone. All 4 of them, gone because of my fear, my paranoia. I've lived with their faces every day since." 4 young people with their whole lives ahead of them, dead because I was too scared to trust anyone. Fox described how he had hidden their bodies in a natural cave formation he had discovered weeks earlier while scouting trails. He had sealed the entrance with rocks and debris, knowing the harsh winters would ensure they remained undiscovered. The campsite he had carefully arranged to suggest they had simply vanished, then returned to the lodge with his fabricated story about them wanting to stay overnight. The search efforts that followed had been torture for him. I participated in every search, hoping somehow they might still be alive, that I had been wrong, but also terrified that they would be found and the truth would come out. When the search was called off, I felt both relief and immense guilt. As for his identity as Andrew Fitzgerald, Fox confirmed what investigators had suspected. He had been scheduled to testify against the Torino crime family in Philadelphia, but had become convinced that there was a leak in the FBI. 2 other witnesses had died under suspicious circumstances while in protection. Rather than wait to be the third, he had fled, using connections from his criminal past to obtain a new identity. I thought Colorado would be far enough, isolated enough, he explained. For 18 months it was. I was building a new life, helping people explore the wilderness. Then one moment of recognition destroyed everything. The FBI confirmed that the Torino family had indeed been searching for Fitzgerald in 1994, with standing orders to eliminate him if found. Whether they would have actually located him in Colorado based on O'Sullivan's discovery was unknowable, but Fox's fear had been real and, from his perspective, justified. The discovery of the bodies followed Fox's directions. The cave he had described was exactly where he said it would be, sealed as he had explained. Inside, investigators found the remains of all 4 photographers, their equipment still with them. The families finally had closure, though it came with the bitter knowledge that their loved ones had died not as victims of a mountain accident, but of one man's desperate paranoia. The legal proceedings were complex. Fox was charged with 4 counts of murder, though his attorney argued for manslaughter based on lack of premeditation. The prosecution countered that deliberately poisoning 4 people, regardless of intent, constituted murder. The jury ultimately convicted him of 4 counts of second-degree murder. At sentencing, the judge noted the tragic irony of the case. Mr. Fox fled one form of justice and, in doing so, created the very situation that would bring him to another. 4 innocent lives were lost because fear overrode humanity. While the court recognizes the extreme circumstances of Mr. Fox's situation, it cannot excuse the taking of 4 lives. Fox was sentenced to life in prison with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Given his age, it was effectively a life sentence. The FBI offered to place him in protective custody given that the Torino family still existed, though much diminished. Fox declined, saying he was tired of running, tired of hiding. The families of the victims struggled with the revelation. Kevin O'Sullivan's sister spoke at the sentencing, describing how her brother's love of photography and adventure had been twisted into the cause of his death. He died because he was observant, because he noticed details others missed. The very qualities that made him a great photographer made him a threat to Mr. Fox. The other families expressed similar sentiments, anger mixed with a strange pity for Fox. One parent noted, "Our children died because of fear." Mr. Fox's fear, yes, but also a larger climate of fear created by organized crime and failed justice systems. It doesn't excuse what he did, but it helps us understand why. The case had broader implications for the Witness Protection Program. The fact that Fox had successfully hidden for 18 months after fleeing protection, and then for another 30 years after the murders, raised serious questions about the program's effectiveness. If witnesses didn't feel safe even in protection, and if they could disappear so completely on their own, what did that say about the system meant to protect them? The Maroon Bells area, once known only for its beauty, now carried the weight of this tragedy. The lodge, where the photographers had stayed, closed since 2018, became an unofficial memorial. Hikers would leave flowers at the trailhead, and photographers would take moments of silence before capturing the peaks that had drawn 4 colleagues to their deaths. Dorothy Campbell, cleared of any involvement in the disappearances but guilty of insurance fraud, had received probation and community service in 1995 for her crimes, the statute of limitations protecting her from prosecution based on the new evidence. She died in 2025, just months after the truth came out. Some said from the shock of learning how close her criminal activities had brought her to a murder investigation. Logan Winters, also cleared but tainted by suspicion for 30 years, had left Colorado in 1995 and never returned. When contacted about Fox's arrest, he expressed no satisfaction, only sadness. "I was angry at those photographers for taking my business, but I never wished them harm." To think they died over something so senseless, it's heartbreaking. Paul Martinez, the retired ranger who had filed the original missing persons report, reflected on how the case had haunted him. In 30 years of service, it was the only case we never solved. I always wondered if we had missed something, if we could have done more. Now I know we were looking for the wrong thing. We were looking for an accident or a crime of passion. We never considered we were looking for the aftermath of pure terror. The photographs recovered from the scene were eventually displayed in a memorial exhibition in Dublin, Kevin O'Sullivan's hometown. His meticulously planned shots of the Maroon Bells were indeed spectacular, showing angles and compositions that had rarely been captured. The exhibition raised funds for wilderness safety education, though the irony wasn't lost on anyone that the wilderness itself had been the safest part of their journey. The final photograph, the group selfie with Fox, became an iconic image of the case. 5 people smiling at a camera, 4 unaware they had hours to live, 1 already planning their deaths. It served as a chilling reminder that danger doesn't always announce itself, that it can smile and offer help even as it plans destruction. Adrian Fox, or Andrew Fitzgerald as he was known in prison, spent his first months in isolation for his own protection. The Torino family no longer had the power it once wielded, but prison has its own justice system. He used his time to write letters to the families of his victims, most of which were returned unopened. The few that were read contained detailed apologies and attempts to explain, though not excuse, his actions. In an interview given 5 years after his conviction, Fox reflected on the path that had led him from witness to killer. "I ran from one life of crime only to commit a worse crime myself. The irony isn't lost on me. I became the very thing I was running from, someone who would kill to protect himself. The only difference is that I have to live with the guilt." The case changed how Colorado managed its wilderness guide certification system. Regular background checks became mandatory, and guides were required to check in at ranger stations with passenger manifests. The Fox reforms, as they came to be known, probably prevented other tragedies, though they couldn't undo the one that had inspired them. The climate research team that had discovered the campsite reflected on the strange role they had played in solving a 30-year mystery. Their leader noted, We went looking for data about ice loss and found evidence of lives lost. It reminds us that every scientific discovery happens in a human context, that the mountains hold more than geological secrets. As the years passed, the Maroon Bells case became a cautionary tale in criminal justice circles about the unintended consequences of witness protection failures. It demonstrated how fear could transform a relatively minor criminal into a murderer, how paranoia could create the very danger it sought to avoid. The four photographers, Kevin O'Sullivan and his three companions, whose names had been respectfully minimized in the public telling to protect their families' privacy, had sought to capture beauty and found death instead. Their bodies were returned to their home countries for burial, 3 decades late, but finally able to rest properly. The mountains themselves remained unchanged, their twin peaks still reflecting in the alpine lakes, still drawing photographers from around the world. But those who knew the story would pause at certain trail junctions, wondering if they stood where 4 young adventurers had made the fatal mistake of recognizing a face from a wanted poster. The case file was officially closed in 2025, all appeals exhausted, all questions answered, except the one that could never be resolved. What if Kevin O'Sullivan had never visited that post office, never picked up those wanted posters as souvenirs? 4 lives might have been saved, but Andrew Fitzgerald would have remained free, his crime unpunished. It was a reminder that justice and tragedy often walk the same paths, separated only by perspective and circumstance. In the end, the Maroon Bells mystery was solved not by brilliant detective work or advanced technology, but by the gradual retreat of glaciers revealing what had been frozen in time. Climate change, that slow-moving catastrophe, had provided the key to unlocking a human catastrophe from the past. It was perhaps fitting that forces beyond human control had finally brought human crimes to light. The mountains keep their secrets until they choose to reveal them. In 2024, they chose to tell the truth about 4 photographers who had captured their last sunset, and the guide whose fear of shadows had cast the longest shadow of all.